Hello guys, I'm Yusaku here, and today we're going to be talking about Yugioh Everything episode 15. Now, Playmaker was very quick in this episode to bail himself out of a tight spot that he was left in last time, where Emma was basically about to end the duel with one powerful direct attack. He was able to use a monster effect from his hand to special summon something, and basically protect himself. She then opted not to attack, which triggered the pattern that we saw for about the first 10 to 15 minutes of this duel, which was basically Emma was refusing to attack until she could take Playmaker out in one shot, because she didn't want his life points to drop below 1,000, otherwise he could use his ability of Storm Access. Now, the first thing that I kind of took away from this with Playmaker summoning something from his hand is his techniques and skills and his style of dueling, I guess, is reminding me more and more of Yusei, where there's a lot of chains of summoning different monsters from your hand and everything else in order to come towards one big combo or one overall big monster. Yusei did a lot of this, especially towards the end of 5Ds when he worked towards Excel Synchro and those types of things. So the 5Ds parallels to this show continue a lot in my head. Also, I think it once more is a testament to how clever Emma is. The fact that she's the only one who's picked up on, okay, wait until you can take down Playmaker in one shot, otherwise the Storm Access thing will trigger and he can generate whatever card he needs and he'll be okay. And that was sort of what I was predicting last episode, so it was good to see that come to fruition. While this was going on, we also got some pretty funny scenes of Ai basically trying to taunt Emma into attacking Playmaker and acting like they were in actual danger, but his acting was really terrible, with both Yusaku and Emma commenting on how bad it was, and so that was kind of funny to see. Ai continues to be kind of an interesting personality to add comic relief to the show. Emma, of course, being as clever as she is, doesn't actually fall for Ai's bait, but by about 60-ish% of the way through the episode, Yusaku finally manages to basically damage himself enough to get his life points below 1,000 by using a series of monster effects. Emma triggered all of her trap cards to negate them, so there was a lot of back and forth action there, which was really cool to see. We even had our two commentators, the two guys who record things, the Frog and Bird, explaining how, wow, this is a lot going on, there's a lot of back and forth action, this is a really interesting duel, and I believe it was Kusanagi who commented this was an above average duel to watch. It was a lot of skillful playing here because they were just countering each other's plays so well. Eventually, Playmaker, being the main protagonist, does manage to come out on top, though. He damages himself enough, his life points drop below 1,000, he's able to summon the Data Storm and use Storm Access. Now, this Data Storm is probably the biggest one we've seen, other than maybe when he was dueling Revolver, which presents an interesting pattern that the Data Storm seem to be continuing to grow in strength, and if that's the case, will it eventually come to a point where Yusaku's able to do all kinds of things just by summoning the Data Storm, because they've grown so powerful. They seem to just keep getting stronger every time he calls upon one, but weirdly enough, despite the fact that they seem to try and pass it off as the stronger the Data Storm, the better the card you get, as someone who does play casually in the card game, so far the best monsters he's gotten, at least from what I can tell, are probably Decode and Firewall Dragon, despite the fact that this Data Storm was most certainly bigger than the one he summoned in the first episode when he got Decode Talker, yet the monster's effect didn't seem nearly as useful. I guess in a speed duel, it is pretty cool if both players have monsters in the extra monster zone to be able to cut off two of your opponent's main monster zones, because then they can only summon one other monster, and that makes comboing a lot more difficult, so it's fairly good in that sense. But I feel like Decode's ability is a lot more flexible with the negations and stuff, although its one link zone is totally useless because of the way the speed duel field is set up. But while we're on the subject of how big this Data Storm was, actually when Yusaku summons it, it's so powerful, Emma totally loses control of her dueling board, and she ends up falling off. And this is where the episode starts to get a lot more interesting in terms of character interaction in my eyes. Emma falls off, Playmaker saves her, and her eyes get really wide. She is shocked that Playmaker has went so far as to save her and that he outreached his hand to help her, and she's genuinely without a snarky remark or anything back towards him, nothing clever to say, which is a little bit unlike Emma. I mean, even when she's not being slightly sarcastic towards the other person, she usually has some kind of a comeback or something to comment on what's happening. She's a little bit speechless here, which is unusual for a character, as I said, which shows that I think she has a genuine respect for him that just keeps growing the more she interacts with him. She keeps using the words interesting to describe him, but I think more so, hey, you're actually really cool, you're a good person type of thing is what she's really thinking on the inside, just she's not the type to fully express that outright. And this scene presents potential shipping evidence. If you really want to go that route, I actually think it works the opposite way, because Yusaku's thought process was pretty much the same when he saved Emma here as it was when he saved Aoi both other times. I think it's him just generally being a good person, and as AI stated, he's sort of become a superhero type of person within Vrains, which means I think he's kind of staying neutral from them. I think he's might consider them friends, but probably nothing more than that, at least as of right now. Although I suppose it is necessary to point out that after Frog and Bird got footage of that duel and they went to play it back so that way they could be ready to hand it in and get their big scoop and the payoff that comes with it, it turns out that Emma deleted the footage, and her comment afterwards was that the duel stays a secret between her and Playmaker, and that could be taken in a number of different ways. Firstly, it could be taken as more shipping material, I suppose, and that she doesn't want anybody to know that, yeah, she's starting to develop some respect for Playmaker and those types of things, and if not, maybe a little bit more than that. It could be also taken as she feels like she's repaying him for having saved her during the duel by deleting evidence of him, since he seems to try and hide himself as best as possible, and as a fellow hacker she understands trying to cover your tracks, or any of number of other ways. I thought that was a really interesting line of dialogue. And Emma's playfulness, for lack of a better word, continues during the little rooftop scene when she comments how the moon looks nice tonight, and then the eye is saying it just looks like data to him, and she says, "You can't understand this feeling." What feeling is she referring to? Is it maybe there's something between her and Yusaku, or is it she's just looking at a moon and she doesn't feel like the eye can appreciate its beauty? Well, that's for the viewer to interpret, I suppose, and she might just be toying with Yusaku. Regardless, it kind of reminds me of something maybe my Valentine would have said to Joey. So that interpretation is once more left open to the viewer. Now, that about wraps it up for this episode. The scene that follows it is basically the whole thing about the footage being deleted of the duel from Bird and Frog, and then Yusaku returning to Kusanagi and falling asleep in the chair, and Kusanagi seeming very much comforted that Yusaku ended up being okay after being in several tight spots during the duration of that duel. So with Yusaku gaining continuing respect from Emma, he's earned the respect of Aoi, he's earned the respect of Akira, and he's earned the respect of Go. His friend circle is reminding me more and more of Yusei, continuing those 5Ds parallels I mentioned earlier in this review, because Yusei didn't really get super close to a lot of the members of Team 5Ds at first. Instead, he was making these individual connections with like Jack and Aki and Leo and Luca, and then as a result, he eventually was able to build like the circle that he used to take on the Dark Shiners and everything else. He wasn't really asking favors of them and those types of things right away. It was kind of this loose connections, and he would kind of go off on his own with a little bit of a lone wolf type of styling, and I think Yusaku's doing something fairly similar there in his friend networking, so to speak. So yeah, it just amazes me how much this reminds me of 5Ds at times. This brings us to our episode preview, in which we basically see Yusaku's going to go ahead and enter through that back door into Soul Technologies. We have Aoi shown in the preview, which definitely indicates, along with if you've seen any of the cast lists, that she will most likely be playing some kind of a decent role in Yusaku's infiltration into Soul Tech, whether that's helping him through dueling, or helping him through like maybe some kind of networking with Akira's assistance, or on her own, or something like that. It's going to be tough to say, but it seems like she's going to have a nice role again. I'm really beginning to get concerned about Go, considering he wasn't in this preview, but somebody else was, and that's Naoki. He's shown in school again, so I feel like he's not doing anything super relevant, maybe watching something on Vrains, and then that's showing us something about Vrains, as he frequently has done so far. We also receive a brief glimpse of the character Kitamura, and the last time we saw him, he was talking about developing an AI duelist army to protect Vrains and probably control it, on top of possibly other suspicious things, but that's aside the point right now. Given how Yusaku's entering the back door of Soul Technologies, Kitamura's probably doing something to do with controlling maybe a prototype of this AI army and those types of things to protect it from Yusaku, and so there's probably going to be a duel between those two, and our episode titles that we've gotten for the future also seem to indicate that. So that's most likely what he's doing in this episode. Otherwise, I think that about wraps it up for my thoughts on this episode, guys. Be sure to let me know what you thought of the episode in the comments section down below. If you enjoyed this video, also be sure to like and subscribe. If not, constructive criticism is always welcome, and as usual, have a nice day.